Thanks. Yeah, I also have one from Wilder. If you'd mentioned a few, but I think you missed this one. This one was from the issue 21, July, and it's called Capuchin. I realized when I had to describe it how weird it really is. Um, it starts with the notion that you wake up sometimes and you don't know what the day is going to be and you don't want to face it. It in the middle imagines the alternative, which is a monastic life, which sometimes appeals to me. At least you know what you're doing. But it ends with an image drawn from an actual monastic life. It's the crypt of the Capuchin monks in Rome, where they are buried in the crypt under the church. And then after 30 years, the bones are exhumed and they are put on the wall as part of this elaborate 6-chapel decoration of bones and hip bones and skulls, and it's wild. So that's the backstory for this thing. And I have a like everybody else in America, I have my own little podcast I do weekly, and I did a whole thing about this one not that long ago. But it's the right length to read, so I just chose this one. So Capuchin. Behind the trees, a subtle shift to gray, but not yet the dawning, the brightening. Soon I will lift these warm covers and stir. Soon I will begin another changeling day, but I miss my old routines, the monastic order of my life in segments, the specifics all mine. Before I was devoured, my bones pecked, picked apart, scoured, sucked clean. In these early hours, I am skeletal, an empty frame trying to remember last night's dream. Always the same small cell, the melted candle, my aging hand scrawling someone else's lines. Such a good preparation for the crypt. Perhaps the chapel on the Via Veneto, across the street from the hotel where she and I made love when we were still free to roam, and where I might be buried alone, to be seasoned in the soil of Jerusalem, and after 30 years exhumed to adorn a rising sun, Ossian, and know exactly how I will be spending the rest of my time.
I think the one image phrase that stood out for me is my aging hands scribbling somebody else's lines. Like, I mean, talk about an intro to lit class, right? We could really kind of go through that line and kind of get the different viewpoints and how it landed with each person.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting that you pull that one out. That first I'm thinking of the scriptorians, right? The monks, but I have a writing gig. That's how I make money. And it's not the same thing as writing poems, you know? So it kind of snuck in there. I realized later it was what I was done with the poem, and then I was going to go ghostwrite some op-ed for somebody. And there it is.
Yeah. So. No, I like that one.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for sharing both of you. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, maybe time for like one kind of finishing thought before we wrap up, if that's okay. But yeah, just in the sense of like back to the experience we've had as writers. So any kind of maybe trick of the trade is one way to put it, but maybe even like a specific example of like problem solving. Here's an example of I didn't know how to do this thing in this poem, and here's how I figured it out. So it could be kind of a generalized thing, a specific example of like working through that one of those challenging times in a poem or in the writing process, and how that kind of like maybe is one of those elements back to the initial question of like how to keep going.
For myself, I think there are two things, and I visited a friend of mine, her high school class, and I talked about this. More often than not, in the last few years, I start writing prose, right? Like if I start writing, if I'm journaling, if I'm doing like something with a prompt or attending a workshop, I write in prose, and then I pull the poem out of the prose. So it's like I'm getting I'm getting everything down on the page. It's wordy, but it gives me something to work with, right? To like, I like to use the word tinker. Like I can go in and tinker with that and pull the poem out, make decisions on line breaks and stanzas and things like that later on. So I'm not doing it in the moment as I'm trying to get it down on the page. So that's one thing that I do. And the other is, I have two poet sisters whom I trust and love dearly. I admire their work, and we do have a writing group. And I think that no matter where you are on your writing journey, if you can find, 1, 2, 3 people that you really trust with your work that you can kind of share back and forth, 9.5 out of 10 times, if they suggest that I do something, it usually ends up in the poem. I try everything that they suggest because it's like, why not? They're giving me like their feedback as readers. So I'm always open to getting that feedback from them. So I always try it. And sometimes I go back, but sometimes more often than not, I kind of stick with what they suggest to me. So again, I think that speaks to community and small pockets of community and where you can go. So those are the two things that I go to.
Yeah, two things came to mind too as you were talking. The first is any kind of writing. When I'm an editor, when I'm a ghostwriter, when I'm writing for a company, whatever. I try to remind other writers that until it's published, it's yours, right? You can do whatever you want. You can try, like you just said, you can try a million things. There's no pressure until it's published, right? There's no right way until it's done. So sometimes people tighten up as they're doing it because they think they're not already doing it the right way. It's yours. It's yours until it's not yours anymore. So that's the first thing. The second thing is just a stolen bit of advice. I've only taken one actual writing course in my life, and it was with the novelist Richard Ford. And it was I don't even know if he meant it as a lesson. I just remember him saying it in the class that stuck with me, and that is, when you're confused as a writer, it's okay for the character to be confused too. In other words, put it in the book, right? And that's gotten me through a ton of stuff in all kinds of ways, right? When I don't know, sometimes the poem doesn't know, and that's fine, But he made that okay. It took a guy about to win the Pulitzer to make that stick, but he made that stick. So
I like that.
Yeah.